Hey everyone, how are you? Hi.
Look who I found. So, there's a lot of hate going on across the United States.
Yeah, it's really awful.
We're really concerned about it. I know you are too. So many of you have written to me and said you want to do something about it. And Tana's like, I want to do something about it. And I'm like, post. Don't go anywhere. It's dangerous.
Use our platform. This is, so often I think of not using my platform for anything political, or, you want to focus more on what you are focused on, your business and what you do, and you want to stay out of this. But this is one of those times where you can't be quiet. You just can't be quiet because it's just it.
I generally have a hard time keeping it.
But I feel like you're
Just
complicit
saying.
if you are quiet during a time like this. So, yeah.
So one of the unique aspects of our work is that we have actually had the opportunity to scan over 1,000 convicted felons over the years. And we have scanned more than 100 murderers. Mm-hmm. And I published studies on violence and murder. And what we found is all murderers are not the same. And all people with domestic violence are not the same. So when we think of hate, we're talking about racism. We're talking about domestic violence, assault.
Yeah, so
murder.
Anytime you dehumanize another person, to me, that's hate. When you dehumanize someone enough to harm them, in this case, murder them, it's hate. It's a terrible thing.
It's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about 4 circles, we talk about there's a biology to this. So what's going on in the brain? And often it's significant, but not the only thing. That's really important. There are lots of people who have troubled brains that never do anything bad.
Right.
And so it's more than that, but if you don't understand the brain, you don't fully understand the problem. Mm-hmm. And so often what we see is low activity in the frontal lobe, so forethought, judgment, impulse control, organization, planning, empathy, and learning from the mistakes that you make. If you've been written up 10 times for bad behavior, somebody's not learning from the mistake you make. And so there's a biology, often head trauma. Mm-hmm. If you know, one of the reasons I got involved in the big NFL study that we did was there was domestic violence and murder and suicide.
And oftentimes in people who hadn't been that way before.
And we actually did a big post on Aaron Hernandez, who had been convicted of murder and then killed himself. So violence all the way around. And marijuana, we think, besides the head trauma, was a significant contributing factor. So anything that's toxic to the brain puts it
or decreases
at
activity more
risk or decreases.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a psychology of hatred and violence. How people think, their development. Were they bullied growing up? Were they harassed? Were they given chronic negative, less than messages? Or were they a bully?
Right. I was going to say, wait a second.
Sometimes it comes from trauma. What our friend Pastor Rick Warren always says is hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. But it's not always that.
No.
Sometimes, for whatever reason, children that are difficult, and we often think of the triad of cruelty to animals,
right.
fire setting and bedwetting as a predictor of future antisocial behavior.
Because you know that I'm sitting here biting my tongue because I'm gonna we've got to talk about the evil component. There's just some people who are evil. There just
But
are.
there's a biology.
I
to
understand,
evil.
but I don't want.
And we're going to get to it. There's a biology to evil. There's a psychology to evil. There's a social circle to evil. So if you're in a culture where that kind of police brutality is tolerated,
I agree. You can feed it. You can fuel it.
or encouraged, and it's not all police officers.
But I want to be very, very.
I was reading something from the LA police chief today that my friend John Lewis from the Newport Beach Police Department sent me. And he basically said good cops hate bad cops.
Right. No one hates them more than good cops. No one hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And we have so many friends who are police officers. And that's where this is just so important to understand, because we know police officers. Like, we have a friend on LAPD, 25-year veteran with SWAT. And he's like, there is no training. There is no procedural, guidelines or books or anything where that was acceptable. None. So this is not a normal thing. This was not a normal, and it's probably happens way more than it ever should. But we want to be very clear that, we're not, for me, there's no excuse. There's no defending it. I know we're explaining it, but I'm going to get a little prickly because
it's just your nature.
It's just my nature.
It's just your nature.
There's no defending that behavior for me. None.
So Hugh Ree says, I'm no doctor, but sometimes it's just as simple as hating racism were learned at home.
Okay.
So that is part of the both psychological and social circle. There's no question that there is a social component. But there are a lot of people, you being one of them.
Me.
That was raised
with
by a racist.
extreme bigotry.
But you're not like that.
No, in fact.
So it's not always that there are ways to
but this is really
ameliorate
important.
that.
So this is really important. So I was raised with extreme bigotry, and I thought that it was enough. Okay, I thought that it was enough that I consciously changed. Because when you're little, you don't really understand. You know that you sort of know it's inherently wrong, but you don't really understand why, and you don't understand enough to be able to argue against it. But as you get older, you do. You have enough world experience, and you make a decision for yourself. And my decision was, this is wrong. I raised my child to believe that's wrong, and so I thought that was enough. This is really important to me. I thought that was enough, and it was Pastor McPherson that actually taught me that's not enough.
So Miles McPherson from The Rock in San Diego.
He's an ex-NFL player.
And he has a book called The Third Option about racism.
And here's what I love about it. Because I know that I offended a dear friend of mine one time, and I never really understood why I offended her. Because I'm thinking, I'm a good person. I'm not racist. I've raised my daughter to not be racist, to treat people equally, treat them based on character, not based on color. And I'm thinking that's enough. But let me tell you why this came back to bite me and why I realized what a shallow thought that was. And I hope I'm not offending anyone, but hear me out. I offended one of my dear friends who is a black woman. She's beautiful, highly educated. And I'm talking to her one day and I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. It's so hard for me to imagine anyone treating people that way. No one in my neighborhood would treat someone that way. None of my friends would treat. It's so hard for me to imagine that this happens. And I wasn't saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it's because I've made a conscious choice for this to not happen. It's really hard to imagine that there are still people that are like that. But that's the equivalent of me saying that because I'm a female, I'm sorry, but there are no men that understand, unless they have been held down or followed or overpowered, no man is going to understand why a woman leaves her house every day and is scared and looks over her shoulder. Okay? You can't understand it because you've not lived in those shoes. You can't understand it because you haven't been smaller or you haven't been, followed. it's the same concept. Okay, these people are, just because we don't think that way, we can't ignore the fact that it's very much still exists in many places. And that was just insulting to her.
Well, in virtually every place.
Right, and it was so insulting.
Exists.
And so for us to just put our heads in the sand and go, I can't imagine it because I wouldn't think that way, is just wrong.
Well, so we have a biology, there's a psychology, there's a, how people think and their development, there's a social circle, and I just saw a video today, I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't one person with his knee on George Floyd's neck. There were three people that actually had
they're all, in my
knees.
mind, they're all responsible.
Right, because it was just horrifying.
They're just lucky I'm not the one in charge.
So there's a social circle, peer pressure, if you will, and there's a spiritual circle. Mm-hmm. And
that's where,
your concept of evil comes in. Because
there are some people who just have character defects.
Believe in a spiritual life that there are consequences to our behavior, they're less likely to act like that.
Well, and there are some people who we know have character defects. They are morally bankrupt. You see that.
But you and I always talk about behavior is more complicated than most people think.
And sometimes it's just wrong.
My hero story, if you will, what I think of my passion story is when my 9-year-old nephew Andrew attacked a little girl on the baseball field for no reason. Easy to call him bad. Harder to go, why? It turned out he had a cyst the size of a golf ball occupying the space of his left temporal lobe. And when we took the cyst out, his behavior went back to normal. He's now getting ready to have his first baby, and it's 25 years later, and he's just an awesome human being. And we just can't forget it's more complicated.
And that's why I love what we do. And I love that you were able to figure that out with Andrew before something happened. Because now that it's already happened, I'm sorry. I'm just not going there.
Well, in my new book, Your Brain is Always
I'm not
Listening,
giving him excuses.
I have dragons from the past.
Yep, no,
that
there's
are always
no excuse.
breathing on your emotional brain. And
I don't care.
Tana's dragon.
I don't care. Is injustice.
Tana's dragon is called the judgmental
Yes,
dragon.
Injustice is not okay.
She is the judge, the jury, the executioner. I frequently hear it. I pet the dragon, trying to tame
It's like, we're
the
not
dragon.
giving this guy an excuse. I don't care what the reason is.
There's no excuse for his behavior.
There's no excuse.
And when I've testified in a number of death penalty cases.
And someone else should have seen it and known. He had 10 other complaints. Someone else was responsible.
Preach it, sister.
Yes, thank you.
I lost my train of thought.
Your death penalty case, sorry.
The death penalty cases, when I've testified in court, showing the scans and how people have troubled brains, nobody gets to go home because it's not like you didn't do it. And it's not like you're not responsible for it. But whenever we judge someone, we should always have all of the information. And
we had it. It was a videotape.
Because almost everybody who goes to prison, not everybody, but most people actually go home. And don't you want to rehabilitate? And you're not going to like this.
So here's me. Throw away the key because...
well, please throw away the key. Dostoevsky, the famous Russian author who wrote The Brothers Karamazov and The Idiot.
You mean the fascist guy that was in jail?
No,
he went to jail.
So many Russians went to jail, and it wasn't their fault.
And it was
anyways, he said something really important, I think. You can tell about the soul of a society not by how it treats its outstanding citizens, but by how it treats its criminals. And this clearly seemed criminal to me.
This is criminal.
And it's so important
But
to take
not
it seriously.
to not do something is to criminalize the victim.
No, you have to do something. I'm completely, I'm like, when are they going to arrest
and
him?
going easy on just because
Right.
no.
But
I'm
then
not,
when you look at the riots,
there should be some punishment attached.
There is, absolutely.
You always say it shouldn't be punishment, it should be justice. I'm sorry, there should be punishment attached.
No, there shouldn't be vengeance. There should be justice. And there's a difference between vengeance and justice. You can see we have this issue. And we're not really trying to use this as marital therapy because neither one of
It's
us
like
are
the one
changing
thing,
our
though,
mind.
but it's the one thing we go around and around about. So just so you know, 15 years we've been going around and around about this.
Kat is totally agreeing with you.
Thank you. Because I know I'm going to get hate mail. It's okay. It's okay.
Tana
it's okay.
is me, so you really, and my thoughts of the cop murder. I completely understand. There is not an excuse for it. We want to understand it, because if we don't understand it, then we can't do anything about it. So, for example, with all the school shooters, easy to call them bad, and they are. Harder question is to ask why, so you can actually do something.
Well, and where that matters
about it.
is going forward so we can prevent it in other people. For me, that's the big aha. When we can learn what's going on, we can maybe prevent it going forward. That's for me the
and
big
we can
thing.
see the warning.
Right,
signs.
this shouldn't happen again. So how do we...
And one of the reasons, so I volunteered to work with the Newport Beach Police Department. I'm like, it can't be bad to make friends of the police department in your neighborhood. That's not a bad thing. But it was after a string of these kinds of events, and the police, who when you're in trouble, you need them, that I wanted to work with them about how to have better brains and better decision making, which actually comes from the physical health of your brain. And the police officers I've worked with have been
they're so
just
nice, yeah.
wonderful.
And that's one of the things I don't like about when there's a bad cop, is because it makes it dangerous for all the good cops that we know. And we need them. And this is an interesting thing. So when I was a little girl growing up in a lot of chaos, a lot, like you would say, a lot of chaos, lots of issues. Whenever I saw a police officer, I felt safe. I felt like, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay. And it's saddening to me. It saddens me that there are people out there who don't have that thought. They are terrified when
afraid.
they see. They're terrified
Because they've arrested their dad.
right, or their family members, or they see people shot, or whatever it is. And so that's such an awful thing. And this is really important too. It's really important for us to understand, I think, where people are coming from. The first time I heard the word white privilege, I was so offended. I was so offended because I thought that it actually, I'm like, I didn't grow up in privilege. So for me, it was irritating, right?
No, you grew up in poverty.
I didn't grow up in privilege at all. And so I was really annoyed by it, but that's not what it means. And this is why it's important to understand. It wasn't until I really understood what they meant. It's like, no, if I call the police, you saw that video recently, weird timing that it came out at the same time, with a woman calling the police on this African-American man who's sitting there filming her, not touching her. And he's a Harvard graduate, and he's a bird watcher, and she's screaming, and she's on the phone with police saying, I'm being attacked by an African-American man, and he's nowhere near her. And so the white privilege part comes in when it's like, if the police show up, if he hadn't been filming that, if he hadn't been who he was, they would automatically believe her over him. She has the privilege of being believed. She has the privilege of being listened to.
So that's white privilege.
And I didn't understand that, and I was so offended when I first heard it. But
but we haven't also talked about looting, damaging.
No,
other
and that's not
people's
okay either.
businesses.
That's an excuse.
It's a hate. And I get it. It's 20 generations
Yes.
of African Americans being abused.
And when people don't have an outlet.
It's called ancestral trauma, that there's ancestral trauma, and that's causing this explosive reaction.
Well, and
but it's also more. When you're stealing money, that's not
That's a crime.
protesting,
No.
that's a crime. when you're burning other people's businesses that
In
they
your
work
own
so
neighborhood.
hard, when you're burning down your neighbor's house, that's a crime. That's hatred as well.
So, and one thing I understand, like when I try to put myself in a position and make it like chunk it down a little bit. If someone hurts someone in my family, I'm gonna go a little psycho. So you probably be reading about me in the paper.
Psycho-er.
Right, psycho-er. You're gonna be reading about me in the paper. So I understand the idea of, when you feel powerless, when you feel powerless, you act out in a way that's you're going to try to regain power some way if there's not a way to regain it. But that is not something that is going to be beneficial to anyone they love or care about or their neighborhoods, or it's not going to gain them freedom. It's going to hurt them. It's a crime. So I think somehow we have to figure out, we've got to be better about handling these situations because it's going to keep happening otherwise.
Well, hatred's been happening from the beginning of time. If you just think of Cain and Abel, this is not
but
a
the
simple
injustice
problem.
of
But if we
this.
don't address it in those four circles, biologically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually, then we're never going to really understand and make a difference.
So we can prevent the
to
next
it.
one.
And so biologically, what's going on in their brain, we live in a brain unhealthy society. That's why the United States has 4% of the world's population and 34% of the world's COVID cases, with more mortality than many countries, because we are unhealthy as a society and often make really bad decisions. So we need to get the biology right. This society, especially in this explosive political atmosphere, this hateful political atmosphere, we're filled with, I call them ants, automatic negative thoughts, the negative thoughts that just steal your happiness. Socially, this is happening more and more, and spiritually, so many of our communities are just spiritually bankrupt. And I think those are the four solutions to this problem. It's not a simple solution, stop playing video games, although don't play them too much, they'll steal your mind.
And one thing I want to address, I actually want to just say thank you to the police officers we know who are good police officers that are risking their lives right now. And one thing, if we don't address this, one of the concerns is, for the last 10 years, being a police officer has just been, it's become such a difficult job. It's such a thankless job that if we don't support the ones that are good and figure out how to do a better job of testing, psychological testing, and not having the bad police officers, because they're a very small percentage in comparison, and we need those good police officers. And the problem is, if we don't do a better job of getting this under control, the recruits that they're able to get and attract, they're not able to get the same recruits. So no one wants to go into law enforcement if they're going to be, if every day their life is jeopardized just because they walk out and they're, a cop, as opposed to not just because of, criminals. So we've got to do a much better job of this all the way around and protecting and supporting.
Reminds me a little bit about, I was a soldier during Vietnam, and the Vietnam War was so unpopular.
Right, soldiers got spit on.
That when you came home from war, that people hated you. And
it's so awful.
And it was socially very stressful for
But that's
so
not going to
many
help the situation.
veterans. Anyways, we hope this is helpful to you. We are thinking about you. Do something useful. One of my patients wanted to go protest. She's an amazing songwriter. I'm like, probably
not a good idea.
Better
It's
to
a little too well known.
use your platform
to
do that and do good and express yourself. All of us should
Music
be
has always
expressing
been so powerful.
ourselves as part of the solution, not an escalation of the problem. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.